Hello and welcome to Wonderful Words. Today we're going to be exploring ways to best practices and vocabulary. The title of our presentation is Wonderful Words. If you'd like to join us along with our link, you can go to bit.ly/wonderfulwords CLIU. Welcome. My name is Christin Adams. I'm a staff development facilitator at the Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit. And joining us today is Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Killian. I'm an ed consultant here at the IU, and we're so happy that you're with us today.
So together we're going to be exploring wonderful words, and we are available if you want to email either of us. If you have any further questions or any professional development needs that you have, we would love to help you in your district. So to get started, we have our objective.
Yeah, so we're so happy to have you here, and we're looking forward to the next hour or so where we're going to take a look at the research and best practices in teaching vocab and increasing our students' lexicon. We hope that you learn a thing or two and are able to walk away with at least one new vocabulary activity that you can do with your students, either in person or online.
As we explore our research and best practices, let's get started with thinking about where you are. So this is a 4-square activity that you could use in your classroom. Feel free to copy this slide and use it. And what you would have your students do is type their name in one of the click to add texts and drag it to where they are. So if you're talking about a new word, let's say the word is big. If you're in a primary classroom, you could ask your students, where are you? Do you understand this word? So are you walking or are you crawling? You haven't heard that word before. So what we want you to do today is think about your vocabulary instruction. Think about what's happening in your classroom. What is your classroom's current level of instruction? Are you crawling? You kind of introduce vocabulary, but you're not really doing much with it yet. Are you walking? You introduce that vocabulary and you give your students some examples. Are you jogging? Are you giving them examples, non-examples? Or are you running? You're giving that vocabulary in context. And those are all things that we're going to talk about today. When it comes to the research and we talk about vocabulary, difficult and uncommon vocabulary is the #1 factor in student comprehension and difficulty learning. So our job as educators is to increase the amount of vocabulary that our students have and help with their vocabulary deficit. When we talk about students that come from homes that their parents do not read to them, this is called the good moon time with their students. Low-income parents, by the time that they get to 5 years old, the students that are in those households have heard 30 million fewer words than their wealthier peers. So our job is really to increase the amount of vocabulary that our students are having exposure to and give them opportunities to practice vocabulary, to increase the number of words that they have and to lessen that gap. So in order for vocabulary instruction to be beneficial, it's really important that the vocabulary is systematic, intense, and efficient. So we're going to try this by reading a 3rd grade text.
Okay, what would it take to comprehend this 3rd grade text? "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it."
So let's take a look at some of the vocabulary that students might not have access to it. What are some of those things that they need to be able to comprehend? So as you can see, we highlighted some of those words for you. Axe, hog house, amount to anything, do away with it. Those are all things that students might not have access to or be able to relate to. So our job is to help students build that.
So we are going to ask that you take just a minute, and we don't need to use the Jamboard at this time since we're not in person or even together on a Zoom, but if you could just take a moment and write down something that you feel like you could do with your students to make better sense of that passage or any passage. And what made that passage tricky? What can you do to help them access that passage?
There's a variety of things that you can do, but let's start with this. Why was this text so difficult to read? Well, the text can be complex, and especially for a third grader who's reading it, there's obscure references, syntactically complex, or they might use vocabulary that is archaic. And that happens a lot when we're reading different genres of text. So our job is to help build the background for our students.
So let's assume that your students are automatic word recognizers. They can read with fluency. Even those students still have obstacles that they will have to overcome when they encounter a new text. Many times students don't have a bank of background knowledge or vocabulary to access a challenging text. So what can we do to provide the access and the scaffolds to make it possible? Well, we know that knowledge builds on knowledge, and we know that a very complex text is made more comprehensible when prior knowledge is greater. Knowledge to comprehend a more complex text can be built up more than a less complex text. And we also know that text could include arts, graphics, and videos. So when we take all of those things into account, there are some things that we can do to help support our students, adding pictures, giving them the background knowledge.
So when we look at those pictures, thanks for sharing that, Emily, there are some great images that you can help students to support them. Once you show them the hog house, that's a great way to just say, here's a hog house. You could teach that before you get started with the lesson, or you could address it as they come onto that text. So our job really is to make sure that when we teach vocabulary, we're teaching it in that systematic way. Vocabulary will vary depending on the text that they're using, and it will depend on the needs of the students as well. But ultimately, we need to remember that vocabulary is the glue that holds student stories, ideas, and content together, and it helps make the curriculum comprehensible. It allows them to access that. If you have any ESL students in your classroom, or you have any special ed students, a lot of these best practices that we're going to share apply to them as well, because our job really is to make sure that they can access the text. And by building their background knowledge and building their vocabulary and giving them the skills that they need, they're going to be successful when reading.
So there is a relationship between text complexity and vocabulary. The understanding of complex texts is directly correlated with vocabulary, which is directly correlated to background text and to background knowledge. So we must give our students the tools that they will need, to read independently and proficiently. But how are we going to do it? We can read them books. That's a great way to start. You should be reading books with your students every single day. And we should be reading them books that are above their grade level to expose them to the new words and ideas and all of that background knowledge. We can also give them time to engage in their own independent reading at an appropriate level where they're able to decode the words independently. And then lastly, we can teach them words that appear more frequently in texts, because we know that not all words are created equal. We as teachers have to make sure that we're taking the time to pre-read what we're going to teach and pull out those words that we call tier 2 words, so that we can introduce, teach, and incorporate those words into our classroom discussions in the future.
There are so many words. So how do we even begin to decide which words we should teach? We need to look for words that need to be fully comprehend the text. So we're going to be looking for those words that could have, if we look on the right-hand side, that are more abstract. There could be multiple meanings or reflecting meanings. Those are going to need some more explanation. If we go to the left, and words that can be quickly explained, they're concrete, they're single meaning, maybe they already have experience with those words, you could just say, this is the word hog, show them a picture, move on. It doesn't need deeper exploration.
So when we're thinking about vocabulary and how to categorize all of the words in a meaningful way, we can think of a pyramid, sort of like an MTSS or RTI pyramid that we're so familiar with. And at the bottom of that pyramid, where we're going to find the most words, that would include words that kids typically learn on their own without instruction. This would be through oral language. As little kids, they're hearing these words and they just kind of know them. This is everyday language, you know, the words like house, small, table, mom, dad, grandma, zoo, all sorts of things like that. English language learners probably know these words in their first language, but they may have to have some instruction in the words in English. Then we move up to tier 2. This is where we really want to focus. This is going to give us the most bang for our buck. Tier 2 words include academic language, the language of education. These words are cross-curricular. We find them not only in many passages, but also in in testing and assessments that we give to our students. And we find them also in the workplace. So these are the types of words that we'll need to have in our vocabulary for a lifetime. Having a solid academic vocabulary gives students access to academic texts. It helps them understand lectures, and it helps them do better on assessments. These are typically abstract words. They need to be explicitly taught with multiple exposures and examples. Teachers should use academic language orally and in writing. Teachers often do not teach these words, so this is a problem. The words that we're talking about are words like summarize, justify, predict, appropriate, coincide. Tier 2 also includes words that take those tier 1 words a step further. For instance, a student might know the word salesman. That would probably be a tier 1 word, or, you know, checkout girl, maybe they know that. That would be tier 1. But do they know the word merchant? Maybe not. So these are words. A couple other examples could be, you know, a student would probably know what it means to take care of something, you know, take care of your new puppy. But would they understand the word if you said, I tended to? That would be a tier 2 word. Or if you told somebody to keep going, they would probably know what that meant. But if you said that you wanted for them to maintain something, they might not have heard it put that way before. So tier 2 words are those words, our academic language, and those kind of taking it a step further from tier 1 words. And then lastly, we come to tier 3. It is the smallest part of the pyramid up at the top. And it's where you're going to find your low frequency words that are content specific. These need to be explicitly taught and are usually only found in specific contexts. So teachers would typically teach these words during a unit of study. This is where you're going to find words like peninsula, isotope, or tariff. And while, yes, our students need to know those words, typically these words are found in context, and we don't have to spend as much time here as we do with those tier 2 words.
So when we're planning for our vocabulary instruction, we want to look for those words that need to be explicitly taught with a systematic, direct approach. We want to make sure that it's engaging and we're planning for success of the student with the curriculum. We still will have some of those vocabulary words that are implicit. We teach them on the fly. It's a teachable moment. Make sure that we teach those in context so students can see exactly what that word means, because as we know with our language, there's multiple meanings for words.
So now we're going to ask you to take a minute to read this passage. And then we're going to ask you what the article is about. So go ahead and just take a moment and read this passage. So, did you figure out what it was about? And how did you know? What clues did you find? Did you find that to be challenging? And how do you think you would feel if you were asked to answer questions about this passage? Well, you'd probably feel pretty frustrated if somebody started telling you that you were going to have to tell them about the passage. So without teachers creating learning opportunities and helping students create meaning of those tier 2 and 3 words, our students will be left feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. So let's take a look at the passage again, and then we're going to talk about some things that we could do to help our students create meaning.
As you can see from this, look at all the blanks we have. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 blanks. And that's if we assume that the students know the word dolphin, because some of our students might even not know that word. Maybe we start quick with a picture of a dolphin. This is about a dolphin. So here's the passage again. When we think about vocabulary, knowledge builds on knowledge. So once you have knowledge of something, you're able to take it and apply it to something else. So what we're going to ask you to do is I want you to look at those words, and we're going to highlight those tier 2 words and then those tier 3 words. So let's take a look at it.
So we can see that there are many tier 3 and tier 2 words. Tier 3 would include these kind of domain-specific vocabulary, prey, marine mammals, herring, cod, cephalopods, and blowholes. These are words that students are probably not going to have to use in their everyday language, but they will have to use in context when you're talking about dolphins. And then we take a look at those tier 2 words. These are the high leverage academic vocabulary words that they should have in their everyday vocabulary. These words include ascend, surface, descend, locate, and feed.
It's really, when we start to teach those tier 2 words, and I know, Emily, you could echo this, those can be taught across the curriculum. It's not just something in isolation that you're teaching just when you're teaching an article about dolphins.
Right.
So what we want to remember that knowledge builds on knowledge. Knowledge is essential for comprehension of all texts. And as we're talking about, we talked about Charlotte's Web in the beginning. We have informational to narrative fiction. There's all types of things that we want to make sure that our students have exposure to. Our dolphin passage, the Charlotte's Web, the more that we know, the more we're able to build on that. So when we're teaching those domain 2 words, we're teaching them across the curriculum. It's not just something that happens during our reading block.
So we know that kids need background knowledge, and we know that we need to teach vocabulary explicitly. So now we're going to talk about how to do that. We're going to make some suggestions, and hopefully you find a thing or two that you haven't tried. But please know that we know that you are all experts at your craft, and we know that you're already doing great things in your classroom. In fact, we'd love for you at the end to share any other instructional strategies that you use for vocabulary that we forgot to include at the end of the presentation. So if you could email us, since we are not together at this time, or add something to the PDF files that we send you, that would be great to share with the fellow teachers, because we know that you all have so many tools in your toolbox. But hopefully today you can find a new thing or two.
Yeah, I would just want to echo that, Emily. That would be a great if they could add their own vocabulary best practices, or maybe you trying one of them in your classroom. We're going to be posting this on YouTube. So here are some ideas to get started. Replace or lock them up. So if you have a word that your students are using all the time, said, for example, the boy said this, they're using it in their writing, they're using over and over again. You could put that word to rest. We're no longer using the word said. Instead of, we're going to explain, we're going to use a bunch of words that you can brainstorm all together in your classroom, and you could lock up those words or put them to rest, because in your classroom, you're not going to use that when you're writing. You're going to use other words that mean the same thing.
Teaching a word of the day can be a great activity, but please remember to make it a word that is connected to something that you are studying in class. We know that words taught out of context or in isolation tend not to stick. So we need to make sure that we have a purpose in the words that we choose. This would be a fun activity to start the year with. You could create a little book so that the students could have a keepsake at the end of the year of all the new words that they learned that year. And teaching a word of the day should include a couple of different things to help it really stick for the kids. You should talk about the word and you can break it down into parts. Is there a prefix? Is there a suffix? How is it spelled? What is a synonym of this word? What is an antonym of this word? Write a sentence with the word. And then if there's time, it's always helpful for kids to draw and help make that connection. It's a fun activity. But just remember, it does need to be connected and circled back around to for it to stick.
Another idea that you can incorporate is the Frayer model. And we included in here, if you click on it, there is a link to take you right to the Jamboard. You could put this in your Google Classroom or start together as a class. When you're using this model, you're having students come up with the definition, the characteristics, example, and non-examples. You could copy this Jamboard so that each student had their own and they can share out with the class at the end, or you could have them work collaboratively in groups. The most important thing, like Emily said, is that it's connected to text. So make sure when you're giving students a word, it's not taught in isolation.
Some teachers like to use pictures to create a visual lexicon. This is a fun activity, and I suggest that if you're going to use something like this, you make a routine out of it so that your students know what to expect each time they see a new picture. For instance, on Monday, you could invite students to identify objects in the photo that you've hung that week, and you could ask them to label the classroom version that's hanging so that it looks something like the photo at the, in this slide. Your goal would be to teach some vocabulary, and then together you would end up with about 20 to 25 words. Hopefully, if you're able to pull that many words out of your picture. So as you can see, they've gone through and they've labeled. So now it's, maybe Monday, and they've heard some of the words that will be coming up in their unit that week or their lessons. And then every Tuesday, you could put those 20 to 25 words into a couple of different categories of your choosing. So it could depend on what you're teaching that week, maybe words that have a magic E in them, or words that relate to different objects that you're going to be talking about, categorizing, or you could have them sort them into nouns and verbs. It depends on what grade you're teaching and how you kind of operate. And then using dictionaries and or their own knowledge, they could add 5 or so new words that fit into each of those categories. So in their notebook, they have their categories sorted out, and then they can add some words to start making connections. And then on Wednesday, you might provide students with 10 to 20 closed sentences that they have to complete using the words that they've been learning about. So a closed sentence might look something like this. It might be a sentence starter. It could say something like, the blank are on the blank. And then the students can look back through the words of the week and they could, fill it in. The flippers are on the feet. So you can have some generic closed sentences and they can use their vocabulary words to fill them in. That could be Wednesday's activity. Thursdays, you might ask students to write several new sentences about the picture under the sentence and use the vocabulary words. And then on Friday, they might put all of those sentences together and choose a title, and voila, each student would have a little paragraph of the week. So of course you have creative freedom in your classroom, but it's important to note that we should establish routines so that our students know what to expect every time. Doing things the same way every week offers our students control, and they love knowing what is coming next and not having many surprises. So whether you choose to teach these visual sort of dictionaries or not, that it would be great if you did, but just make sure that you use them in a similar way each time and that your students know the expectations of the week.
And going right along with routine and procedure, here's another routine that you could establish in your classroom. It doesn't matter which routine you use. You might have one that works great in your classroom now. What's important is that you have a systematic, explicit way to teach vocabulary. So the Kim technique is this. You have the students write Kim across the top of their page, or maybe you have a vocabulary journal or something that you have your students write it, or maybe you do this across all of your content. As you can see, the word that we used over here is sum, so it's a math vocabulary word. You would have the students identify the key vocabulary or idea. The I would be the information/definition, and as you can see for M, the memory or picture clue, which helps solidify in with the students so that they can see a visual representation of the word that you want them to define.
So there are some more vocabulary instruction ideas, and these will include links in the version that you get of this presentation for you to kind of explore more. But we should be talking about cognates with our English language learners. This is the bridge between Spanish to English, and we have included math, science, and just a general list of cognates. Below that, we see morphology. That is talking about a morpheme is the smallest meaningful unit. So understanding meaningful units of language is a very, very important piece of learning to read and learning to understand words. So we should certainly be spending time with our students talking about word origins, talking about roots and suffixes, and talking about things even as simple as adding an S means that there's more than one, or adding an ing means that someone is doing something or something is happening. So morphology is very important with vocabulary instruction. And then we're going to come up to these content word walls. And I want to just take 1 second to talk with you about word walls. Word walls do serve a purpose, so they have a time and a place where they are appropriate, but we should be very careful, especially in our K1, 2, even 3 classrooms with word walls. We are finding, the science of reading tells us that students need to understand the speech sounds in language. So our word walls in classrooms, when it comes to using them for writing purposes and in spelling purposes, we're finding that sound walls are actually a better choice. But when it comes to content and science and social studies and math, a content word wall would certainly be appropriate. So we can use them, but let's just make sure that we're using them correctly and we're not asking students to use them in a way that makes accessing those words harder. And then of course, scaffolding, from informal everyday to formal academic language. We want to make sure that we're providing our students with words that they are able to access and understand, and that go from more accessible to more challenging. There are a couple of word wall activities that we've included, like finding the number of words that relate to one another and explaining their relationships, or creating categories using the words and being prepared to explain them. A think, pair, share ×3. Find a word you struggled with when learning and share what helped you learn, what helped you finally learn it. I know some students like to think of a rhyming word. That is a fun little trick. Ask students to compose a question whose answer is one of the words on the wall, and then share the questions. You can play Pictionary, draw illustrations of the meaning of the word. And you can also find smaller words within bigger words and explain how the smaller words help to understand the bigger word.
And here's a quote that I just feel like will help us put all of this together. The more students learn the high utility words, the better they will be able to comprehend text that contains those words or similar ones. And that's how we're creating meaning with our students. So for example, here is a great website that you can take your students to for further exploration of words. This is VisuWords, and then the link is included in the slide deck, or you could just go to visuwords.com. In here, you can explore all types of words. So let's say we wanted to use the word said, like we talked about earlier. As you can see, this is quite complex of how said even started. And as you can do explain, you can type any of the words. Now you can see the noun, the verb, the adjective, the adverbs. When you hover over top of the word, it will give you the definition for that word. Make plain and comprehensible. And if you double click on any of them, so to clarify, to clear up, you can see it expands the language even more. You could show students how words are interconnected using this website. What we're going to have you do now is you can stop the recording or push pause, and we're going to have you practice. Take a look at one of the activities, a textbook or a text that you have with you or in your classroom that you're about to teach. I want you to take a look at number 2 to apply the instructional tier strategy. So write down some of those tier 2 words, highlight them, look at some of those tier 3 words, those content specific words. And now, as an educator, there's so many vocabulary words out there, but which ones are you going to spend the most time on? Which ones are critical for comprehension? So when you start to think about the ones that you're going to get the most bang for your buck, those words that you're going to spend more time on, and there's going to be words that, you know, they might never see that word again. They just used it in that passage. You're going to tell them what it means, move on. Pick one of the vocabulary best practices that we've shown you today, or any of the ones you already use, and start to incorporate that into your lessons in a systematic way. Because our ultimate goal is to make the curriculum comprehensible.
And then last but not least, after you've unpaused and come back, now that you've learned a little bit more about best practice and the tiers of vocabulary and some of the research, we would like to ask you to redo the activity that we did at the very beginning and type your name in the box and move it to the appropriate area.
Hope that you're on your way to jogging and running through vocabulary instruction. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Emily, for all your expertise when it comes to vocabulary and language. And I hope you tune into our channel and hear more of our videos. We are here for you at the IU, and we love to hear from you about our presentation, and we hope to see you soon. So thank you.